So, in terms of cultural ecology, kind of going back to uh, environmental determinism, the environment is the kind of the premises that the environment is responsible for changing and enabling culture. This has a lot to do with adaptation. The environment determines cultural traits like language, function, daily life, diet, weather, landscape, division of labor, rituals, religion. And Julian Stewart is basically the one who's going to promote this. Um, and he coins the term cultural ecology. Marvin Harris is going to move toward this and move cultural ecology into the cultural materialist aspect of things. Um, and again, it's really how societies adapt to the environment. So, in terms of how does this relate to food, obviously the native Californians ate acorns because the acorns were available. They became a vital part of their diet. If they weren't here, they would have had to rely on different food products. But again, this is important as well. How does the environment form culture, change it, and limit it? This is the big kind of question with environmental determinism. The next piece that we need to talk about is biological determinism. These are all, again, theoretical components within cultural anthropology. E.O. Wilson coins the term sociobiology, that culture is determined by our biology, and then he comes up with the selfish gene, um, and kind of moves to culture is determined because our biology is a certain way, right? And then you guys should all be asking yourselves, well, how much of culture is determined by our biology, by our DNA, by our ability to use our thumbs, those kinds of things. And there's plenty, right? But what each of these environmental determinists and biological determinists leave out is they tend to focus on one area and make it that. It's very binary, if you will. So in terms of what I kind of promote is more of well, you're in cultural anthropology, so cultural determinism, right? And there's a key piece here is that there's a feedback loop in all three of these categories. Culture and environment and biology are all related. Um, Again, one of the examples that I like to use is malaria. Malaria didn't exist until we as a culture group decided to clear cut forests to create agriculture. Now we've created a disease. Now that disease is going to affect our biology in the way that sickle cell anemia um, is an anemia trait on red blood cells. And sickle cell, if you have sickle cell, not necessarily the trait, but if you have sickle cell, typically people die before adulthood. But if you carry the trait, you're immune to malaria. So our bodies and our biology adapted to this malarial condition, right? So again, and then culture can then change that depending on who we marry and who we breed with and sexual selection and things like that. So there's a huge feedback loop in terms of cultural environment and biology. Remember, a lot of times culture can override biological components as well. Most human groups know um, that endogamy or inbreeding inside your group is going to cause genetic mutations, and they're usually not advantageous. They're something that is negative. With that, they form rituals and or ceremonies that promote exogamy or relationships with groups outside of your own. And again, this is a cultural kind of biological component together, but the environment determines who and what groups you actually are interacting with based on availability of resources, divides in terms of mountain ranges and or rivers or oceans. And so there's a huge feedback loop on this. Now, that being said, also, even though that we know that interbreeding is not with our own group is not going to be advantageous in terms of variation in our genetics, culture can absolutely override that. So if we are in a group that decides that they're going to move to a new location, let's say in rural Montana, and they don't want to share or spread, they want to be isolated in a certain area, that culture, that decision to do that is absolutely overriding our biological understanding of needing to create variation within our genes. So there's a huge feedback. Don't focus on just one. They're all three related. all three can actually force some major things. Environmentally, if we have a flood or a drought, we can absolutely change our minds around where we move or where we exist, and culturally that becomes a decision. Culture has an effect on the environment, like global warming. Obviously, we've basically told ourselves that this is the way we want to go, but this is the effect. Then that return effect is going to be global warming is going to change how we have to grow food or interact with one another. Um, Biology affects cultures, especially in the like death, like response to death, right? So different cultures respond to death differently. In America, we tend to have what's called a death taboo, and we'll get into that when we talk about time and religion. Um, Again, culture can change biology and this is where the interplay comes in. Like, why is Griffin talking about this interplay? Because this really has everything to do with food, diet, and medicine. Um, Changing diet due to food taboos, right? We could create food taboos if we want to. This is just culturally determined. And the environment affects biology in terms of ability to survive and human natural selection. I kind of talked about the interbreeding issue. Um, this is this is a vital piece to understanding this non-binary component. Even in anthropology, knowing that binaries exist, this is the issue that people tend to focus on one theory and move that theory into this realm of this is the right theory, and if you don't think this way, then you're wrong. And this is exactly binary, even though people understand it even in the field. So thinking that environment determines everything is leaving out the component that culture will adapt to different environments or just move out of that environment. So I don't know that culture or that environment is determining that, or is culture determining that. Now that being said, if the environment is basically changing and changing the climate, humans can also change the way that they live. So it is. I don't know that necessarily every culture group would respond in the same way to that environmental change. So if you can follow me here, if it's not a universal that culture groups would respond in a certain way, how is it that we can say that environment is determining the cultural reaction? We could say that no matter what, if you have an input, then you're going to have an output. But in terms of those things being different, that's where I see some flaws. And it's definitely leaving out the biological component. So yeah, sticking with one just theory is not necessarily the more rounded theoretical kind of component. Now you're probably thinking, well, why is Griffin making me pick a theory? I'm making you pick a theory to explore that theory and how you're going to utilize it in your own event that you're going to observe, in your own ethnography that you're going to write for this class. And it's just to get you used to one. I don't care if you blend them. If you blend symbolism with functionalism, that's fine. My fear is that maybe you don't have a command over the theories enough to blend them. If you do, go for it. I'm into it. But again, picking one theory doesn't necessarily mean that you're going the binary route as long as you don't think that everybody else is wrong, right? That's when we start to get into the binary structure. Anyway, that concludes the week. Any questions or anything else like that, please email me. Again, I have gone back into the gradebook and eliminated the zeros out of the gradebook because I want people to turn in their work and reply to the discussion posts. If you do it late, like up to a week, obviously, a week or more, I'll still give you half credit. So for me, late work is still going to have a penalty. However, it's not as big of a penalty. If you miss a whole week's work, you're already down 3% in the class. But if you do it late, now you're only down 1.5%, which is more doable. I'm about you guys succeeding and kind of learning content. So again, if this is going to work for you, please just got to go back and do your work. I'll leave all not turned in work basically blank, so that if people are having, I'm getting a lot of emails about I was in the hospital or I had these problems. I totally understand all those things. In the name of kind of fluidity and consistency, the policy is kind of 10% on every day that assignments are late. But again, there's nothing that says that I can't give you half credit if you turn things in late. So this is my ability to change the syllabus or determine grades. If there's any questions on that stuff, or the late work thing, then just please email me. I am available.